Well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get underway. Welcome again to the Lubar Center at Exine Hall, Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher. This is On the Issues. It's our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting and important work in this region and beyond. Today we are joined by Stephen Olikara. He is the founder and president of the Millennial Action Project. So what is the Millennial Action Project? Well, I'm going to let Stephen explain it, but in very simple terms, what his organization is hoping to do, it's a nonpartisan organization, they're hoping to sort of reestablish political cooperation among...
Thank you.
Wow, this is a cynical group, let me tell you.
It's okay, my parents laugh too, so it's okay.
So, I mean, very simply, they're trying to figure out a way to deal with the polarization and gridlock we see in American politics today. Is there a way to bring folks together to get things done? That's the big question. Stephen is a guy who you will see in television or you will read about in the newspaper. He talks about the next generation of leadership. He's been recognized by many different organizations and given many different honors for his work. Even though he's such a young guy, he still gets a lot of that recognition. We're going to talk to him about how this came to be his life's work, what his organization is doing to change our political paradigm, and I think it'll be a fascinating hour. So we're delighted to have Stephen Olikara visit Marquette University Law School. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I'm going to do something a little different this time. We're going to talk about his personal life right off the bat. It's okay. It'll be fine. It's okay. Because what's interesting about Stephen Olikara's his personal life is that you have said in various settings that music was a big part of who you are. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. You are a Brookfield, Wisconsin native, correct?
That's right, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Mike, for having me. As you know, I'm a big fan of your journalism, and I think it's increasingly needed and important in this media environment, so it's a real honor to be here. And, of course, we're here in the Lubar Center, so I just want to recognize my two dear friends, Marianne and Shel Lubar, for your friendship and support of all the efforts that we've been doing. Let's give them a round of applause. And lots of other friends in the audience, Barbara Lawden, who serves on our advisory board, many others. And probably too long of a list to mention just now, but thank you all for being here. It really does mean a lot. And as you mentioned, Mike, I grew up here in Brookfield, Wisconsin. My dad has worked at GE Healthcare. My mom spent many years working at Elmbrook Public Schools. My brother works at Rockwell Automation. And my passion in life was music growing up. My first band was in 5th grade, and I originally started playing rock primarily and then really expanded into jazz. I was taught at the Milwaukee Conservatory of Music. And what I really enjoyed about music, particularly in Milwaukee, being such a politically and ethnically segregated area, was the ability for music to transcend so many of these boundaries in our community. Having grown up in Brookfield, a lot of my peers typically wouldn't go into Milwaukee for extracurriculars, but one of my extracurriculars was being a radio DJ at 91.7 FM, WMSE. And I like to say I was one of the top jazz DJs because there weren't any jazz DJs in Milwaukee. And the one jazz station at the time got bought up and started playing popular music. So for me, that was really my passion, and we would play at different high schools around the community, from Rufus King to East to Tosa East, and for me, I would love seeing the fusions of different cultures, different backgrounds coming together, and ultimately, music exposed me to some of the challenges in the community and sparked a real interest in public service. So ultimately, that's how I went further into the direction of politics, although my parents, we were talking about this earlier, couldn't quite explain to their friends what I was trying to do because it wasn't engineering or law or medicine or something more traditional. And my dad would ask me when I'd come home from school, I went to UW-Madison, he would say, so this whole politics thing, like, great hobby to have on the side. But fortunately, I still have a job.
You said another life experience that made you the person you are today was was your work on energy and climate
Yeah.
issues. How so?
Well, my first policy passion was the issue of climate change, and I think what drew me to that issue is just how much of a political crisis it is today. It requires extraordinary levels of, I think, moral fortitude and courage from our political leaders, because it requires, in some sense, short-term sacrifice for benefits that we will see long into the future for voters who don't even vote today, generations unborn. And so it seemed to me like that was a space that needed a lot of energy and attention. And beyond that, we needed more leadership capable of transcending the divides that we have. I think this issue is one of the most polarizing issues we face, and the consequence of polarization is inaction. And when we don't do anything about this challenge and many other long-term challenges, we keep kicking the can down the road, and I think that's a real disservice to our children's generations and those who will come after. So that's what got me really engaged and energized in politics, was trying to take on that issue, trying to figure out how you can reconcile not only conservative and liberal views, but also business and environmental protection views, and seeing how we can reconcile these very divergent views so we can find common ground and actually move forward, because right now we're not seeing the level of progress that we need to see.
Let's talk for a moment about the origins of the organization.
Yeah.
Where did the idea for the Millennial Action Project come from?
Well, the origin is here, basically right here in Milwaukee, and also going to school in Madison. I saw I think the decline of our public discourse here in Wisconsin, and seeing the level of polarization. One study from the National Conference of State Legislatures, we work very closely with them with our state level work, found that the Wisconsin state legislature is the most polarized in the entire country. And you look at even the metro Milwaukee area and how polarized this region is. Some studies have shown that this is the most politically segregated metro area in the country. And so for me, I saw a lot of good ideas that were dying simply because of our tribal instincts and the decline of our political discourse. And then seeing how that infected so many issues, whether it's education or climate change or student loan debt, for example, and wanting to be able to do something about that. So I moved out to Washington, and I was working on energy and climate issues, a few different places, and ultimately realized that unless we radically changed our political leadership, we won't solve these long-term challenges. And then I started reading history. And then I think the thing I learned from reading history is that major political change in America has often come generationally. If you look at the civil rights movement, for example, the leaders we talk about, John Lewis, Dr. King, were in their 20s and 30s. Dr. King was 26 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. When you go to the Dr. King Memorial, those quotes on the wall, each word delivered by a man in his 20s and 30s. And then if you continue on the path, you get to the Jefferson Memorial. Thomas Jefferson was 33 years old, millennial aged, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. James Madison, 36 years old, when he wrote the Virginia Plan, which became the Constitution of the United States. Most of the founding fathers since 1776, under the age of 40. And so my read on history is that change comes generationally, and that was the kernel of inspiration for the Millennial Action Project. You have a generation now, millennials, coming of age, now old enough to be in public office, be members of Congress. And the real question we have to answer is, how is that next generation going to govern America? Are we going to be as tribal and polarized and as dysfunctional as the status quo, or can we create a more cooperative, more future-looking governing paradigm? So that's why we started Millennial Action Project. We launched it in the fall of 2013 on the heel of the last government shutdown. And congressional approval ratings went down to 9%. And one of the polling organizations sought to find just how low is 9%. And as you can imagine, pretty low. Head lice, more popular than Congress. Used car salesman, more popular than Congress.
Journalists?
More popular than Congress.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
The financial industry, Wall Street, more popular than Congress. So pretty low, and it was in that context we launched the first ever youth caucus in Congress, where Democrats, Republicans, young members of Congress coming together on a generational long-term agenda. And then we started to hear from state legislators, which is where a lot of young people are taking their first steps in politics at the state and local level. And we realized we can build really a pipeline of leadership coming up from the state level. So we've since expanded our network, which we call the Future Caucus Network, into the state legislatures. And we have a great group here in Wisconsin, as well as in now 22 states across the country. The last state was Virginia. Before that, we were in Topeka, Kansas, launching the Kansas Future Caucus. And it's really turned into a movement of leaders across the country. And what's exciting now is how they're already producing results, already exhibiting the types of courage that we hoped we would see when we launched this organization back in 2013.
I want to get into that with you, both at the congressional level and what you're doing at the state level.
Sure.
And we can cite some of those examples of success that you just referred to. But I do want to ask you an important question here. There was clearly a decision made that we are going to be a nonpartisan organization.
Yeah.
There had to be some discussion about, can we, in today's very polarized world, can we be effective being a nonpartisan organization?
Absolutely. A lot of questions about that early on. It's the far less convenient route to go, because if you're starting something, you need philanthropy to get you started. And the vast majority of political philanthropy today is polarized along party lines. And so if you want to build an organization that's capable of crossing the divide, that is a much more difficult route to go. You add to that the fact that we're a millennial-driven organization, so already we're discounted on many levels. And then you add to that I didn't have people I could call in when we started this who can write a $100,000 check, for example, or could write some of those big checks. So it was very difficult, and there was a lot of pressure just to go down one route or the other. But for us, we felt like if we aren't going to do it right, it's not worth doing it at all. And so we decided to take the harder route. And at the time, I was reading this book, one of my favorite books. It's called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And what he talks about in The Alchemist is when you walk in your purpose, the universe conspires for your success. But to find your purpose, you have to often take big leaps of faith, take risks, and go down the less convenient path. And so that's why we decided to do it right or not do it at all.
You said that you decided to start with Congress. And why was that? I mean, you could have started at the state level, but you started at Congress. Why?
That's a very good question. I think we started in Congress for two reasons. One, we wanted to be in the belly of the beast and start where the problem was the worst. And it is the worst there, for sure. The level of tribalism and polarization there is truly at alarming levels. Some studies of Congress have shown that the level of partisan polarization today is at the most extreme level since the end of Reconstruction. And so we wanted to start where the problem was most severe. But secondly, we knew that by launching in Congress, we can get a level of national awareness that will allow more young people from the state level to get involved. So that visibility, I think, was very helpful early on.
So give us the names of people who are key players in the future caucus in Congress today.
So our co-chairs are Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, and Congressman Mike Gallagher from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And our our co-chair is Congressman Carlos Curbelo from Miami, Florida. And then our vice chairs are Congressman Mike Gallagher and Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. What I'm excited to share, just in terms of our leadership team, we now have 30 members of Congress, but they're able now, I think the group has evolved to the point where they can respond to some of the bigger issues that our nation's confronting. With the recent gun violence in Florida, for example, our two Florida representatives, Carlos Curbelo and Stephanie Murphy, a Republican and Democrat, came together to introduce bipartisan legislation to allow the Centers for Disease Control to study gun violence. There's been, I know, it sounds crazy, there's been a ban on the CDC from studying this for 20 years. And we've proposed to lift that ban. So the group has very much evolved, and another organization did a study on the most effective legislators who are capable of crossing the divide. I'm proud to say our members are largely in the top half. Our co-chairs are in the top 10. And our two vice chairs were rated the first and second most effective freshman members of Congress in the current session.
So help people in this room better understand exactly what your organization does. So you say we're going to have a future caucus in Congress. I assume what the cutoff age is, like 45 or something
Roughly,
like that? Roughly. What are you doing specifically to facilitate progress?
Yeah, so there are three big things we do. The first thing that's a requirement for legislating is you have to build trust in relationships. And if you're going to call a member of Congress from the other side of the aisle to co-sponsor a potentially risky bill, you have to know that they're going to be there for you, that you can really trust them. So a big part of what we do is just bringing together informal and informal settings to build levels of trust. There's been a lot of media attention, for example, on how our members work out in the morning. They go to the gym, and some legislation has actually come out from the treadmill in the morning in the congressional gym. So that's the foundational thing that we do. The second thing is identifying innovative bipartisan opportunities, where, for example, last week, our congressional caucus introduced bipartisan legislation to help returning service members get the types of technical career training for jobs in the new economy. We were able to find some of those ideas from different partners in our space, bring that to our legislators and allow them to rally around that. Another good example is student debt reform. A lot of times, legislators don't even hear about some of the best bills that are out there. So we play an information sharing role as well as a policy resource role. And particularly at the state level, we have an annual conference where our members come together from across the country. They're able to share the best ideas that have succeeded. And another version of that we've recently launched is our Democracy Reform Task Force, because we've heard so much energy from our members who want to make the system work better, to deal with the issues of money and politics, gerrymandering, ethics, transparency, and now we're able to share those ideas in a bipartisan way across the country. The third thing that we do is try and amplify the narrative of young people actually making a difference in politics. Because today, I don't need to tell you, if you read the political headlines, it's pretty cynical. It's pretty easy to feel disillusioned by what's happening right now. And that has a self-reinforcing effect. If you think the political system doesn't work for you, you're less likely to engage in it, voting levels will decline, and what we need to do is shift that narrative, provide a counter-narrative capable of combating the cynicism in our politics today. So when we see members, for example, our Republican co-chair in Ohio, a state that has been gerrymandered for the benefit of Republicans, introduce legislation to end gerrymandering to the opposition of many people in his own party, and then over the last few months got the support, passed in wide bipartisan majority, get the governor, Republican governor of Ohio, to sign it into law, and then just for fun, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger tweeting about it. That's real leadership. That's real courage happening. We need to amplify that because otherwise people are going to start to feel like nothing can get done. Things are happening. I've already seen where red and blue can come together and make change. We need to amplify that, and I think more people will get involved if we can do that.
I'm fascinated to hear the kinds of issues where you're trying to find common ground. Are they issues that are particularly of interest to millennials? Is that the way you're deciding that? Here are things that really do concern millennials. Is that how the decision is made?
In part. So when we started, we did a lot of millennial polling to understand where the younger generation is. And interestingly, to find that the political views really do not track along traditional left-right divides. There's a lot of more independence. The fastest growing political affiliation today is independent. A plurality of millennials identify as independent, and that's because there's a blending. I call millennials the a la carte generation, willing to pick and choose civil liberties, climate change, markets, entrepreneurship, free enterprise. It's all coming together in a very interesting political space. But increasingly, we're trying to take on some of the most, I think, entrenched issues that definitely matter to millennials, but really matter to everyone, whether it is trying to reform our political system, climate change, things that just where we haven't been able to break through the partisan logjam, because I think when you're able to bring the inspiration from young people and reframe things in a different way, not between left and right, but between future versus the past, you can get interesting coalitions. And so we really do respond to where we think there are the greatest opportunities, but also where we see the most energy from our members on the issues they want to work on.
You were talking about the respect that millennials sometimes don't get.
Yeah.
Do these lawmakers, these millennials, do they feel respected? Do they feel their voices are heard on Capitol Hill, or do they feel that it's largely a bunch of older people who are making the decisions affecting the future of this country?
Yeah, it's very interesting because one of the procedural issues right now in Congress and many state legislatures is the decision-making power and the legislative writing power is very concentrated in the leadership, the majority leader, minority leader, the speaker. And as a result, you have all the other members who are younger typically, who don't have as much of a voice. And so they might be producing the greatest pieces of legislation, but it's much more difficult to get traction. And so that's why we've come in to try and add a platform where they can increase their influence, increase their visibility to where hopefully their legislation can get more traction. And what's really interesting is that when the leadership, the majority leaders from across the country hear about what we're doing, they want to get involved too. They ask, hey, I might be over 45, but I still want to be involved. And we let them get involved because we actually need governing partners for legislation to get over the finish line. But we really do have to look at how we can, the term used in Washington is regular order. We need to get back to regular order where there actually is a committee process, there's a deliberation, there's an amendments process. That's the reason why Congress is supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world. The way, as James Madison in the Federalist Papers, he said, this country is going to be very diverse. We're going to have differing views, but we need well-designed institutions capable of advancing the public interest. So we really do need to get back to a deliberative process, and that's why we're, I think, in Congress and many state legislatures, one of the greatest champions of a more deliberative process.
Let's talk about your efforts in the various states. I think you said 22?
Yeah, 22.
Now,
yeah.
Wisconsin is one of them, announced last fall, I believe.
Yeah,
so how much progress are you making at the state level? Is it an easier task, or is it more difficult than at the federal level?
There's a lot more action at the state level, as you can imagine, because you're seeing more bills actually get signed into law. There's just a lot more happening. And so we see our legislators coming together on so many issues, you're just seeing a higher percentage of them make it over the finish line. And a good example of that was the crowdfunding laws for entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, prior to about 3-4 years ago, it was not authorized for new businesses to raise money on a peer-to-peer basis. And as a result, a lot of good ideas were dying because a lot of new startups didn't have access to the institutionalized venture capitalists. And so our lawmakers, starting in places like Texas, California, ultimately it was authorized here in Wisconsin and other states, started leading the first ever crowdfunding laws. So like you would on Kickstarter, you can raise money peer-to-peer. So that actually got signed into law. Another good example is the whole sharing economy, where you have Uber, Lyft, Airbnb. That's revolutionizing government regulation. And as you can imagine, a lot of governments have been stuck in a previous century, and when you have new technologies coming in, lawmakers don't know what to do with that. And so what we wanted to do is, for these sort of issues, create, again, go beyond create a left-right coalition capable of overcoming the divides, and we enacted some of the first laws to put in place the safety precautions for the sharing economy, but also to embrace innovation in these new services that are providing new opportunities and new services for people.
You say you've been traveling quite a bit, and you said there are a fair number of successes to talk about right now.
Yeah.
So give us an example. What successes that really stand out to you at this moment?
Well, the two that I'm most excited about, which just happened in the 2 weeks I mentioned to you, this redistricting bill and then the legislation in Congress around the returning service members. But there have been a lot more. For example, online voter registration was done in Ohio, automatic voter registration in Hawaii. These were cases where our lawmakers said, we need to make voting more accessible, easier for young people, so they actually feel like they have a stake in our democracy. So that's gotten done in a few of our states. And there's been another big issue around the skills gap for veterans. So in Congress, we brought together the Department of Labor, the Department of Defense, the VA, to provide more data so we understand where the skills gaps are and to be able to provide legislation so we can reduce that. So those have been just some of the examples. I know here in Wisconsin, for example, they're looking at robotics education, they're looking at the self-driving vehicles. They're taking a very technology-heavy approach here in Wisconsin. They just had a meeting last week where they had 40 members of the legislature come out for that. So trying to make progress, but actually, let me go to the one that I'm most proud of since our entire time being together as an organization. You know now that I got into this because of the issue of energy and climate change. In 2016, things were just as partisan as you would expect them to be on that issue. And our Republican co-chair from Miami, Florida said, we don't have the luxury of being in a philosophical debate about this issue in Miami, Florida. So even though I'm a Republican, I want to be active on this. So we started a climate change working group within our caucus. We got Democrats and Republicans together. In 2016, an election year, our group was able to pass a clean energy innovation bill, get it appropriated by a Republican appropriations committee, and get it signed into law. and expanded the funding for a widely bipartisan, widely successful clean energy program. And I told my staff at the time, when we started Millennial Action Project, I thought it would take 5, 6, 7 years to get some real traction on that issue. And we did it much sooner. And I think that shows how political change can often be exponential and surprising in many ways. And we've been able to make change in much more quickly in some issues than we expected, but also more slowly in other areas.
So you're optimistic, and yet I think the narrative in today's politics is that we are more tribal than ever, that we are as far apart, as you pointed out, as far apart as we've been in a long, long time. How do you balance those two, that prevailing opinion that we're further apart than ever and your optimistic attitude about the future?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. I mean, the narrative that we're more tribal than we've been recently in the past, where we're more partisan and where trust in government is declining, that's factually true. Mm-hmm. That's happening, and it's infecting all levels of government. We were just talking about the Supreme Court race. It's infecting all levels of government today. But we have to be optimistic, because if we are cynical, then nothing's really going to change. And I've been reading a lot about the 1960s, where President Kennedy, when he was inaugurated, he said, we're passing the torch to a new generation of Americans. And he said, we need to be energized about our challenges, as big as they are. I really think today, if we can be energized and optimistic about how we can change politics and draw from some examples that are on the ground that we're seeing, we can start to provide that counter narrative and start to change people's views of things. The current trends right now are totally unsustainable for American democracy, where you have trust in government from in the 1960s being closer to 80% to now it's about 15%. No democracy can sustain with those levels of distrust. And so I think I'm more naturally an optimistic person, but I also think about the origins of this country and my own background in music. I was recently in New Orleans. The genesis of jazz happened in a place where you had African-American influences and European influences coming together, fusing together to create this truly American art form that was greater than the sum of its parts. So many other styles of music like blues. And to me, I think that's the true story of America. And so I just think if we can revitalize that narrative of America, that we truly are, for all of our diversity, we have our common humanity, that we are better than the sum of our parts, that we can be a self-governing people, then I think we can start against all of the odds, to start to move the needle.
I want to ask you about sort of the conventional wisdom that exists out there, and there are some very broad generalizations drawn about millennials.
Yeah.
That they don't, maybe aside from the Bernie Sanders turnout, but they're not terribly interested in politics. They don't vote in big numbers, and yet you're talking about them being the change agents in this.
Yeah.
Can they be the change agents if they feel somewhat disengaged from the political world?
Yes, if we do our work right. Because in some ways, the younger generation has to be the change agents. There really isn't another choice. Those who are in their 20s and 30s today will be moving through the leadership pipeline. They will be driving American politics over the next 20 years. And that's why it's so important right now to be investing in that next generation now. It's too late after they've left office. Now they're rising stars. They're defining the future of politics. So in some ways, there can only be one answer to that question. At least that's our view, that the next generation have to be change agents. But to address some of the larger narratives about millennials being disengaged, I think we often mistake apathy for disillusionment. Because is it really apathy when you have this younger generation having the highest levels of service participation in the entire country? Millennials today are getting engaged through volunteerism and community service, through social entrepreneurship. It's just there's this gap because they don't believe that government and politics is the vehicle for change. So for us, we need to close that idealism to civic engagement gap. The energy is there, but the process is broken. And that's where I think we can actually play a very constructive role in trying to channel that energy, but also real anger, towards something that's more constructive, and to shape a narrative that is capable of overcoming our party tribalism.
Do you worry that young folks are cynical about politics already? Doesn't that make your job a lot harder to break through that mindset?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, if it were easy, we wouldn't be here right now. We're taking this on primarily because it is hard, and because there is a cynical view out there disproportionately for young people. Voting rates are lower than it is for other generations. But again, we're working on this issue because it's hard. If it were not difficult, then maybe I would have gone into engineering.
Your parents would have been happy.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a bigger question in this whole discussion, and that is that I hear you saying that you think this can be done through basically the two-party system.
Right.
We've had people in this room. Catherine Gale is a former CEO of Gale Foods. She wrote a pretty interesting piece with Michael Porter at Harvard Business School. And it basically says that our politics industry, that's their language, is the competition in the politics industry is failing. And they suggest that maybe we need more people to run as independents. Maybe that's the way you produce change, by making those votes in the middle more valuable than ever. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think this can be done through largely the two-party system?
I really take a both-and approach here because Catherine's a good friend of mine. She has a fantastic report that I recommend you all read in Harvard Business School. And she talks about the need for more independence and also some very structural reforms around what they call ranked choice voting, where you rank the candidates that you want. So there's an instant runoff. They talk about multi-winner districts. Those reforms are important, but they're not going to happen tomorrow. And we're not going to have a third party tomorrow either. We won't have a political environment tomorrow where you have independents running for president or independents successfully running in many states for the U.S. Senate or for governor. So I think that's very important, but we also have to start with where we are in the two-party system. And there's a lot of change you can make today. I think with the lowering party affiliation you're seeing with the younger generation, you're seeing partisan identity much less important to their governing philosophy. So that allows for a less tribalistic, more cooperative approach, even though they have a D and R technically behind their name. And so I think we have to pursue that strategy while we also keep our eyes on the longer term here as well. I do think if the current trends continue, it's not impossible to consider that we would have major third parties in the future. When you have party affiliation this low, this incapable of solving the major challenges that we have today, I think you will start to have a wave of independence and a wave of third parties winning, and I think it will be likely millennials who are running on those tickets. But today, some of you may know, the deck is stacked against those candidates. It's much harder even to get on the debate stage. It's the barriers to entry to even get on the ballot are much higher. People talk about the two-party duopoly because they have conspired in many ways to prevent new party candidates for coming in. And I think that's undemocratic in my opinion. So I believe we need a both-and strategy. We need to work within the two-party system. That's what we're doing right now. We also have to keep our eye on the longer-term trends where there might be third parties coming.
I want to ask you one final question about the work your organization is doing. And it's something we talked about. We were talking in my office before we came down here, and we were talking about the media world in which we live today, and that the louder, the more boisterous, the more over the top, that's what can often get media coverage.
That's right.
You're having a very serious conversation about things we can do on the policy front, individuals working together in a cooperative spirit. That's not sensational stuff. Do you worry that your message gets buried in sort of the tenor of the times?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because today, again, the political media industry is driven by conflict and sensation. Conflict has become profitable in the media industry today. And so as a result, it makes it much more difficult for constructive voices to break through. And on top of that, when all of the oxygen is taken up by Trump, we're not looking at the underlying issues facing our democracy. Let's remember, these trends that we're facing today preceded Trump. And if we're not smart about the underlying challenges, then we're going to be in the same position or a worse position when Trump leaves office. And so for us, we do struggle with this because even though we're so focused on the kind of long-term, the underlying challenges of good government stuff, we know that people's attention is not there right now. Their attention is on the combat of Democrats versus Republicans, the combat between Mueller and Trump and those types of things. So we need to make a message that's relevant but also constructive. I think that's one of the great challenges in American politics today, not only for reform organizations like us, but for political candidates who are trying to get elected to office with a constructive, forward-looking, visionary message. It's just harder for that to occur. And that's why I really believe for all the structural reforms we need right now, which we obviously advocate for with our Democracy Reform Initiative, we have to get to the underlying toxic political culture in our country right now. And that can change by building a band of young leaders who are capable of changing that culture. And that really comes through all of us looking in the mirror and asking ourselves, how are we interacting with people who are different than us, who have different political views? The most important thing I learned from playing jazz music is the ability to listen. Mm-hmm. I became very curious about people, curious about different ethnicities, different backgrounds. I think that's what we need in our politics today.
Before we take a few audience questions, I want to ask you about something that is unrelated to your work with the Millennial Action Project, because I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's a recording artist, multi-platinum recording artist named Akon, and I think he's from Senegal, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so you were involved in a project called Africa Lighting. Mm-hmm. Tell us about this project. This is a pretty amazing thing to me, and I thought it'd be worth sharing with the audience today.
Absolutely. Well, again, before getting into political reform, my passion was sustainable energy, and I did a lot of work internationally with, I was part of a public-private partnership between USAID and Coca-Cola to get safe water access to schools in rural parts of Africa. I worked at the World Bank on sustainable energy. And so I had this background, and I met this multi-platinum recording artist, as you mentioned. I don't expect this audience to have listened to his music. However, I was really intrigued because on so many of these issues, when you have a large following of a new audience that's not typically engaged in it, you really can move the needle in surprising ways. And so Akon has over 100 million people following him on Facebook and Twitter, and he's even bigger in Africa than he is here in the US. And we knew that we can inspire a lot of young Africans, and we wanted to figure out how can we kind of leverage that brand to be most impactful. So he came to DC, and we were brainstorming some ideas, and we came up with the need to electrify Africa with solar power, because for a lot of young Africans who are going to school in rural areas, they don't have access to power. They can't do their homework in the evenings. They don't have light to be reading books. And so for us, we came up with a new financing model and a new technology. It's distributed solar that goes into these rural villages, and we front the cost for a lot of it, have demonstration projects. And then because of the celebrity factor, we're able to get the heads of state and the ministers of energy directly involved, directly on board with this. And there's a lot of politics there too. The heads of state would like Akon's endorsement for their political campaigns. So it's exciting, and we're able to get a much larger distribution than I think a lot of traditional energy projects that I've been involved in the past. So now we're in 15 countries. We've electrified over 1 million homes with solar power. And the thing I'm most proud of is we've employed over 5,000 young Africans in the business of installing and maintaining solar power. And not going too deep into African energy politics, but China right now is flooding the market with capital. And so for us, we think it's really important that the U.S. has a foothold there. And when you have these foreign influences coming in, they often want their own people to be engaged in the projects. And so for us, it was really important that we had young Africans. We started a solar academy in Mali that's training up thousands now of young leaders so they can be directly involved, so they get not only clean power out of this, but also jobs.
It's fascinating stuff. Before we go, let me ask you the question that I'm sure you get after every one of these appearances, and that is, when are you going to run for office? When I mean, well, I'm sure people sit here and listen to you, and sometimes I have to remind myself you're still a young guy based on your experiences in life. But does that appeal to you? I mean, you clearly believe in public service. Does running for office fit into your idea of public service?
Yeah, well, just to piggyback on what you just mentioned there, I think public service is an honorable calling. It is an honorable career track. It is wrong today when less than a third of Americans see public service as an appealing career track. It's wrong when a majority of people don't believe that politics can solve the problems that we face. I believe politics is honorable. You can have tremendous positive impact.
Honorable.
It can be honorable. It can be honorable.
No, I don't say that cynically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
It can be honorable. I'll just mention as a quick aside, everyone I've met in politics can fall into two categories. People who want to be something and people who want to do something. And unfortunately, the category of people in the people in the latter category is much smaller. So I believe public service is very honorable. I'm personally, the way I've always looked at my career is thinking, where can I always be most impactful? And right now, I do think we have a broken politics. We need to change it, and I feel like I can have the most impact right now by building up this movement of leaders with the Millennial Action Project who do want to overcome these divides, who want to make bridge building more of a norm in politics, and where we can actually start to shift the conversation. And so, you know, politics will continue to be part of my life, but right now I think MAP is the most important thing I could be doing. But I'm also very connected to Wisconsin. I'm here a lot, and my folks are still here. I serve on a couple boards in the state, so I'm watching what's happening here, and I guess we'll see where I can be most impactful in the future.
I do have to ask you this final question, and we'll take the audience's questions. Do you think we're losing high-quality people because of the way politics sounds and looks and feels today? Are really good people who could do amazing things for our cities, our state, our country, are they just taking a pass because they don't want to subject themselves or their families to this?
I worry a lot about that because I think it's true. I think there's a misallocation of talent right now. I think our generation's best and brightest are largely not going into politics. You see a lot of talented young people going into entrepreneurship, which is also very important, very good, going into other fields. A lot of other fields that are more highly compensated, to be honest. But it really worries me because when James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were sending letters back to one another in the founding era, they talked about how this democracy relied on capable and enlightened people running for public office. In many ways, the experiment in democracy relies on us having very capable leaders. And they've put in place protections, very intentionally, in the scenarios where we get ill-minded leaders. And that's very important, too. They anticipated a lot of the things that we're seeing today, unfortunately. But I really think we need more talented young people seeing public service as a calling and wanting to go into that. And that's why I think our work is so important right now. It's absolutely essential. We make it similar to like it was in the 1960s, where really the ultimate calling was government and public service. We need to bring that back in many ways, and we need to revitalize that for the 21st century. It just seems to me, though, in order to get to that point, it's not just a finger wagging of you guys need to get more involved. You need to vote in higher numbers. It's got to be something bigger than that. It has to be, where can you actually make a difference in politics? It has to show that the system actually is more functional. It has to show that the system is more honest, where your vote actually does matter. And we have to shift the narrative, too. I think if we can do those things, we'll see a whole wave of talented young people come in. And as we said, I'm very optimistic. I think it'll happen.
Let's take some questions from the audience. If you're in the seating bowl, raise your hand. Push down on the button in front of you. It says push. Keep your finger down on the button. And if you're in the back, Ryan has a microphone. He'll be glad to hold it in front of you. And we'll take a few questions. And please, no speeches. I'm going to start in the back because we don't get to the back as often as possible. We'll actually do a couple up there. We'll start with the gentleman right there.
Amazing presentation. Thank you kindly as a fellow millennial.
Thank you.
I'm just excited that you didn't check your phone once, so hats off to you. My question is, along your last point, your best and brightest talent are going into entrepreneurial endeavors, et cetera. We're seeing when someone runs for politics, that name gets dragged through the mud, and millennials came of age at a time in college when, at the height of stupidity, all of that is now on social media, and now you're about to go into politics, and it's a really hard ask for young people our age. So my question to you is, outside of politics, how does the millennial business community get involved, support you, support MAP, and other people willing to take that jump?
I think that's a great question. I know we have some members of the millennial business community here, and I guess I'd defer to all of you, but from my experience, there is an important shift happening right now. Where 5 years ago, when we were just getting this effort off the ground, there was a lot of, I want to have nothing to do with politics mindset, arm's distance away, and very cynical too. They just didn't feel like politics could do anything. For them, they said, I'm head down in building my own company, my own business, and that's all I'm focused on. After the 2016 election, I think that was a shock to their system, and they wanted to figure out, okay, what can I do? Because clearly this is not working. And for a lot of the millennial entrepreneurs I talk to, they want to find some way to be helpful, but they didn't know how. And so what we do is we work with them. We say, obviously there's our effort, but there are a lot of great reform efforts happening. And what I would say the most important thing is we don't just engage in a partisan back and forth. I think the millennial business community needs to be sophisticated enough to look at the underlying challenges of our democracy, address the long-term trends that got us into this mess in the first place. And so I'm actually optimistic just by the fact that more people want to engage now, but I'm actually cautious that we don't engage in a way that is anger-driven, tribalistic, and in many ways emblematic of the problem right now. I just think we have to be more sophisticated than that. But the last thing I'll say just to that is we need them involved because we won't be successful without them.
Was there one up right there, the gentleman right there.
Hello, thank you for that presentation, and I'm in the millennial group myself and have been following the organization somewhat closely for the past couple of months and grateful for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
My question regarding Akon, who was actually the opener for my first concert, so I have listened to him plenty of times.
Wow. Did not expect to hear that.
Yeah, leveraging his star power to influence politics in Africa. And you talked about how millennials are pretty distrusting of the government in the United States. Have you tried to form non-political partnerships with celebrities, entrepreneurs, innovators that maybe millennials look up to more to try to drive them into politics through other celebrity?
Yeah, we have had some of those partnerships, and we've done events with Akon and other celebrities. It hasn't, I'll be honest, it hasn't been a focus of our work so far, just because I want us to be engaging the next generation of leaders for reasons that are inherent to politics and not just because we're fascinated by a celebrity-driven culture. I think we are seeking a cultural change here. And so I'm not discounting that, where I don't think celebrities are unhelpful, but I don't think that should be the core of our work right now. I think we spend way too much time focused on the tabloids, to be honest. And unfortunately, I don't know if I should say this, but CNN and other news organizations have become tabloids. And you can applaud for that. I think that's just so destructive to our democracy right now. We need to be focused on the big issues of our time. We have so many big challenges facing our generation. And I think the tabloid culture has been destructive. So we just want to strike this balance where we're not buying into that culture, but also trying to build visibility for our work at the same time. So we're doing our best, and I'm sure we could use your advice on that.
Let me take a few more. Trying to go way over here. We never get back to that part of the room, so hang on a second.
You had mentioned that people that are over 45 will ask to join and help you become part of your work. And as the mother of millennials and a former educator, I'm wondering if sometimes those people or men in power try to either take over what you're doing or co-op or push you in certain directions.
Wow, that's a really good question.
Careful.
Well, those leaders who, are directly involved with their organization, they believe in the mission. They believe that their children's generation can be part of this massive revitalization in politics, and so they're not trying to co-opt the agenda. They're listening a lot more than telling, and that's really great. But for those who aren't directly involved and whom we still partner with in state legislatures, I think we just try and move them to find the right answers. And I really think there are really two approaches to politics that I've seen. One is starting where everyone is and kind of accepting the status quo. And that's where a lot of people in leadership, those who are in more senior positions are, because the way our system is, their idealism has just been beaten out of them. And then there's a different approach that really tries to inspire people to rise to a higher calling, to serve the better angels of our nature, to move to a place that they didn't think was previously possible. And what I've seen through our work is our leaders inspiring those who are in more senior positions to move to a place that they didn't think previously possible. They're inspired by the movement, and once they have that light bulb go off, they come to us and say, how can we be helpful?
Other questions? Let me go over there. Yes, sir. Right here. Yep. Lou.
Do you have
Finger down on the button if you would. Thank you.
Do you have an example of a concrete victory in the Wisconsin legislature? Not a process thing like, we formed a bipartisan committee for whatever, but some concrete results in one of the most difficult places to work, I think, probably right now in the country?
Question, if you couldn't hear it, do you have concrete results of actions taken in the Wisconsin legislature that you can talk about?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, and we just launched a few months ago, just last fall. So they're just getting started, and they're in the process of introducing new bills. So there hasn't been one that has gotten over the finish line yet. But for me, I think in this political environment in Wisconsin, the most significant thing I've seen is seeing the most. Here, I'll give an example. At 2 meetings ago in the Wisconsin legislature for the future caucus here in the state, they told me, and I'm not going to mention names, they told me they had the most conservative state senator and the most liberal state senator attend their meeting. And they said they've never seen them together in the same room before. And that was just one of those moments for me thinking, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is create a conversation where you are able to bridge these vast divides and inspire people to at least come to the table, start talking, and build relationships of trust and ideally affection. Once you build that foundation, then you can start moving on to specific issues. And I feel like we've done a good job now of starting to build that foundation. We still have a ways to go. We now have a few specific issues and policy areas that they're working on. And then I think you'll expect to see some legislation over the next 6 months or so. The other big thing that we're going to do here in Milwaukee, actually, is a new program that we're calling Red and Blue Dialogues that will involve our state lawmakers, but also community members on the ground, to bring together people from this, as we've talked about, segregated environment, to have regular, sustained dialogues across the aisle, across red and blue, and see if by the end of maybe about a year of conversation, if there's any increase in common understanding. So we'll be doing that, and I'm sure you all will hear more about that in the coming weeks.
Okay. Yes.
I think I'm doing it okay.
You're doing it all right. Yeah, just keep your finger down on that button.
I'm thinking of the Florida high school students and their protect children, not guns.
Yeah.
And I think high school students and students in college are different, and they're going to be millennials. Now, the students in Florida have set March 24th for protests all over the country in Washington, and April 20th as a student walkout. And I'm wondering, will MAP connect with them in some way?
Yeah, so those conversations are happening right now. And let me just say, I think the young people in Florida are going to revolutionize this country on gun violence issues. I do think it's different this time because this time it's the students who are leading the movement. I think we're going to look back on this time and see the beginning of one of the great youth movements in American history. And on March 24th, which happens to be my birthday, I think this movement is going to shake the conscience of this country. And so we will be involved. Those discussions are happening right now, so I can't announce anything necessarily, but we, as I mentioned earlier, we already had our future caucus members on the Hill introduce a bill. It's not the silver bullet, but trying to, and last year after the Las Vegas shooting, it was our members who introduced the bill to ban bump stocks. That is sort of a workaround to make these rifles automatic weapons. So these are incremental examples of progress. But I think something much bigger is happening, and I expect we'll be involved in some way, but we're going to announce those details in the coming weeks.
I'll take maybe one more question or so, yeah.
There's a major gerrymandering case coming out of Wisconsin pending currently in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
My question is, did your organization file an amicus brief? And if so, what position did you take? And importantly, how many of those 30 members of Congress that are with you signed on to the brief?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number for that, but we were asked by the leading organizations on the case to submit an amicus brief because they knew, it was very interesting, they called me and they said, you know, one thing we're realizing is that more of the younger elected officials are interested in good governance. There are more young Republicans who want to get involved in this issue. We worked with Congressman Mike Gallagher last fall to come out publicly on nonpartisan redistricting reform, which, as you all know, being here in Wisconsin, that's pretty significant for a Wisconsin Republican to do that, who has such a close relationship with Governor Walker. So yeah, we did help them recruit members onto a variety of amicus briefs and more broadly tried to build public support around that case. And we'll see what happens. But I really do think some of the public pressure that our young elected officials are putting on this case is going to be very, very impactful. And when they see examples of what we just got done in Ohio, I think they'll start to see a larger trend, and hopefully the Supreme Court comes down on the side of nonpartisan redistricting.
We'll take one final brief question. Go ahead.
How do we get rid of big money in politics?
Good question. So this is one of the reasons why we launched our Democracy Reform Task Force in a way that was not all Democrats. We would have not been accomplishing anything if that were the case. We have Democrats and Republicans who are now working together on campaign finance reform, among other democracy reform issues. And we already have some success stories around the country that could percolate up into something larger. The one example I'm very excited about in Connecticut is they have a form of campaign finance reform where if you're a new candidate, you can opt into a system where you have to raise a certain amount of money from small donors, and then the state government will provide you with a grant to run a competitive campaign, all while you commit to not taking contributions from PACs and other special interest money. The result of that was a whole wave of new young candidates from across the political spectrum got elected to the state legislature. And what was very interesting was in 2016, they sought to suspend those rules because I don't know what happened. Maybe the leadership felt like there are too many young kids infiltrating our legislature now. So for whatever reason, they sought to suspend those rules, and it was the Young Legislator Caucus came together in a bipartisan way to defend those rules successfully, kept them on the books, and now they're under threat again, but hopefully, again, they will be successful in defending those rules. So I think there are things we can do in the short term, but also in the long term. In the short term, we can get bipartisan agreement around immediate transparency. And then in the longer term, I do think we need to create a left-right coalition to empower small donors.
We're going to wrap things up there. Before we go, a couple of reminders. On Thursday, we will be joined by the Executive Director of the Milwaukee Harbor District, Lilith Fowler. She'll be talking about these really pretty amazing plans for the area that is just south of the 3rd Ward. Really big stuff being contemplated, both from an economic development standpoint and an environmental protection standpoint. She will be with us. That event right now, as I understand it, is full, but you can watch it live. We live stream all of our events, so feel free to join us at 12:15 for that. And then on February 28th, Professor Fumiaki Kubo, he is from the University of Japan. He is considered Japan's leading authority on the U.S. We'll be talking about a lot of foreign affairs issues with the professor during his visit to Milwaukee. That's been arranged through the Japanese consulate in Chicago. Still just a few seats for that. It's almost full, but if you have a chance to join us, we would love to have you here. Again, as I say, at all of these events, thank you very much for your time, your interest, and your attention, and most of all, thanks to our guest today, Stephen Olikara. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.